Welcome back to another Tarot Topics episode. I'm Carly, the owner of Soundside Studios in Austin, Texas. We specialize in tarot and events here. Today, I wanted to talk about 3 of the most common tarot myths I encounter in my practice. We're going to talk about where they come from, what they mean today, and why you don't need to be bothered by them. Before we dive in, I would love to know what are some of the tarot myths you've heard about, and have they limited you in your practice? Please share in the comments and we can address them in a future video. Until then, let's dive in. Myth number 1, tarot decks must be gifted. Not true at all. I like to think about where this myth came from though, because it was really a beautiful tradition. I think back in a time before the internet, before Kickstarter, and before self-publishing, where it was very hard to find a wealth of knowledge about tarot, or very hard to find a variety of decks. It must have been important that an individual offer a friend access to a community or a group of people that knew about tarot. And so I imagine that a deck being offered as a gift was that invitation, saying, hey, come meet my mentor and learn how to read tarot cards. Come hang out with us on a Friday night as we practice this thing. Nowadays, we have more resources. Tarot is no longer practiced by a small number of people. It's a very popular thing to do. And so you can go to any bookstore and see a variety of decks on the shelf. You can see a lot of books with different opinions about how to approach the cards, and you can access millions of free resources online, including online card generators. So don't be afraid to use those resources, and please do go buy your own deck. Because not only can you support a small business and an independent artist when you go buy your deck, but you find something that really matches your own aesthetic, and ideally a deck of cards that represents who you are, so you can really identify with those images and the symbols within the deck. It's going to help your readings be even more effective and better than anything else. So, myth number 1, a tarot deck must be gifted. Busted. Myth number 2, cards need to be cleansed regularly. This is technically a matter of personal practice and preference. But for me, as a teacher and a guide to other people learning how to read tarot, I encourage people to not obsess over cleansing their cards. Instead, I think it's more important to take care of them while you're using them so they don't need to be cleansed. I always recommend shuffling mindfully so that your cards are kept in good condition while you're shuffling. I recommend storing them well in a bag or a box and keeping them someplace kind of out of the way. Some people like to put them on an altar. That's usually a really good spot. And when you're practicing with cards, make sure you're fully present and your mind is there so you can truly connect to them. Often I see students getting a little bit too involved with this fear around needing to cleanse cards before they do a reading. And the ritual then becomes a rut. So that now the idea of practicing tarot or pulling out their cards to do a reading has 5 or 6 steps before they can actually work with the cards, where they have to sage first and they have to do all these other steps. And so that can become so burdensome that they don't even do the reading, and they would have really benefited from that introspective moment. I recommend that if you take good care of your cards, you'll be able to grab those cards and do a reading and set your mind right for any time you need them. And that kind of brings me to the 3rd point here, which is that the real tool of any tarot card reading is your own mind. A lot of times we need to do more of a mental cleanse, which means washing off some of our assumptions or our stresses or quieting the inner voices so that we can have a reading that is more objective and understand where we are in the moment. What I like to do as a reader is I imagine a small force field. And in the time this force field is around me while I'm reading, I visualize my ego as a really pissy 8-year-old version of myself. And she's standing there with her arms crossed and she wants to go get a hamburger and french fries and she's just pretty pissy. And I ask her to go step outside that force field or go stand by the trash can, and I'll come pick her up in a few minutes when I'm done with my reading. We're never going to get rid of our ego, but if we can recognize that part of us that's feeling a little bit snotty or rude or irritated or hurt, and just ask them to stand aside for a moment so a different part of ourselves can do the thinking or the feeling and the processing, then that can help us feel more balanced as we gain a broader perspective on life. But then you gotta go integrate that ego later, take the good information you learned from your higher self or that broader perspective, and then put it all together to find the next steps that are right for you. So, all this to say, it's not so important that you cleanse your cards. It's more important that you focus your mind and understand how you're approaching your reading. So, the myth that you need to cleanse your cards, busted. Myth number 3, tarot is a spiritual practice. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. Tarot has been integrated into different religions over the years and different spiritual practices. Some of these are closed cultural practices that have deep historical roots. Others are more open and invite people to jump in and practice tarot as they see fit. And so I always like to remind students that once you learn the foundations of tarot, you can decide where you take it. I think it's important to know the original intention when tarot cards were first created, who started to change them in the big ways that are still part of the deck today, which mostly happened from the 1700s into the 1900s, and also to know what is the purpose of tarot today. Once you have those 3 things understood with your own research, then you can start to decide, what does this practice mean to you and how do you integrate it into your life? Humans created tarot cards, and they created them to be used by other people. And so you have every right to decide how tarot fits into your life and your spiritual or secular practice. You can help evolve this practice. My practice is fully secular. I don't use cards for prediction. Instead, I think the mind is really where all of our power is, and when we focus it well, we get a lot of benefit out of tarot. The cards themselves are just ink on paper. But I have other colleagues that feel spirit guides speak to them when they're looking at the cards. And I would never disregard the guidance they get in those moments. This is what works for them. And so you can decide what area of the spectrum you fall on, and maybe it even shifts throughout your life. What's important is that your practice feels authentic to you and that ultimately it benefits your life. So, myth number 3, tarot is a spiritual practice. Busted. You get to decide what tarot is for you. I hope this video helped to dispel some common myths around a very old and yet very relevant modern practice. Make sure that you make tarot your own. Go buy yourself a deck, sign up for classes, learn how to read for yourself, or get a reading with a professional in your area. Enjoy tarot. It was made by the people, for the people. Let it be fun and add some benefit to your life. Please also like and subscribe, follow me on my socials to stay in touch, and I will see you next time. Until then, happy reading.